Schools District, and board member Sabrena Rodriguez wanted to address the concerns of the neighborhood. Just as a background, the Midtown Ventura Community Council started in 1997 with the catalyst issue at that time to save Washington School from being torn down. Since then, we have evolved into serving and educating the community on issues affecting all of us. Our mission statement, dedicated to the preservation, enhancement, and revitalization of Midtown. We will hear from Dr. Rice. Okay, let me try that again. We will hear from Dr. Rice and Trustee Rodriguez, who will share information regarding Washington School. We did ask for any written questions. We have a few and a couple of statements. But if you want to ask a question at this point, you will need to use the chat icon that should be on to the right of the screen, on the bottom somewhere there. I don't see it right now with the presentation up, but it's there somewhere.
Look for the bubble up in the upper right corner, and that'll get you the chat.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Next to the number of people online, which is 25 at this time, it's that little kind of quotation area circle next to it. I would also like to remind everyone that our council always treats all in our meetings with respect and courtesy, no matter the issue at hand. So with that, we'll begin with Dr. Rice. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the context of your committee, and I did have the pleasure of presenting once before, so it's great to be back with you all. I enjoyed my first opportunity to speak with you, and actually this time I'm really thankful for the opportunity. I can tell you that I'm really hopeful that by the end of the night, the council will have a really good understanding of where we are with respect to the Washington School in terms of the property, the district, the 7-Eleven committee, because I would tell you right now, just based on some of the correspondence that we've been receiving at the district, it's obvious that there's a lot of unfortunate misinformation out there, and I'm hopeful that those items of misinformation can be clarified. So what I thought I would do is similar to what you did when you opened the meeting, Dan, is just give you a little bit of a background so we can put this whole thing into context. And the way I would start the discussion would be to take you back about 16 months ago when I was hired. One of the first challenges I was tasked with was to try to start putting dynamics in place to support placing a general obligation bond on the November 2020 election ballot. That general obligation bond at that time was felt to be one of the most, if not the most important item to the district. And I say that because those of you who live in the community know that our schools are aging, and in many cases, not in many cases, in all cases, the funding we get from the state is not sufficient to keep them in the best working order. And so we do the best we can with the funding we have. And obviously over time, our facilities have taken a beating, and the weather and the elements and the students and just the wear and tear have created challenges for us, as well as just the changing nature of education with the advent of technology and the demand that puts on HVAC systems and the electrical capacity that is needed to support those devices. So there's just a lot of need. And in fact, when we did a long-range facility master plan, we hired a consultant PBK architectural firm who went out and assessed what we would need to do, and it was pretty close to $1 billion. That's with a B. It was 900 and something million dollars. At that time, we learned that our bonding capacity was only about 300 million in the district, so we started scaling back on our hopes for renovating our properties. And we also understood that while we could not pass a bond that was large enough to do all the work that we needed. In fact, it was about 1/3 of what we needed. We knew that we needed to take a very close look at our own resources. I just think that's the fiscally prudent thing to do, and I believe the board was of the same mind. And by that I mean it's just good stewardship of your resources and of the community's resources to try to make the best use you can of the properties and the reserves that you have to renovate your schools before you start asking the taxpayers to chip in. By the way, if by way of context, I believe our last bond was in around 1997, so it's been well over 22 years since we went out to the community for a bond. And we have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, dollars per student leveraged through the bonding capacity in the county of all the school districts. And we also have gone the longest of any school district in the county since we last passed the bond. So that's all kind of context. In order to try to leverage the resources that we had, the board tasked me with the responsibility of working with our chief business official, Betsy George, to put together what is called a 7-Eleven committee. And they call it a 7-Eleven committee because you're supposed to have between 7 and 11 members. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but it is what it is. And so we went about the task of putting that committee together, and that the committee process and the need for the 7-Eleven committee is outlined in the education code. And the purpose of the committee is to serve as a citizens oversight committee that would precede any considerations and action and even discussions by the Board of Education of the school district in order to review properties that the district has and give the benefit of the citizens committee's best thinking to the school board before they go out to the voters for a bond and before they declare properties surplus and just make a decision to either sell or lease or otherwise use the property to generate revenue to help offset the shortfall between what the needs are in the district and the money that you have available and the money that you can generate from a bond. So we knew we were about $600 million short of doing everything that we wanted to do. So we put the 7-Eleven committee together, and up on your screen right now, you can see what the purpose of the 7-Eleven committee is. It is advisory in nature. It has no authority to dictate to the school board how to use a property or whether a property can be declared surplus, which is a precursor to leasing or selling a property. That's an important point that everybody on the call and in the community should understand, that before the board would be able to sell a property or lease a property, it would have to be declared surplus. And the purpose of the committee is to do a study of the properties and tell the board what they think about the relative merits of doing so. So you can also see here the parameters of membership on the committee. You can see here that there's some guidance about how many public meetings you should have and the necessity of having a public hearing as a committee, and the district's responsibility to provide information to the committee, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then the duties of the committee in terms of putting together a set of recommendations, which could include declaring, we think you should declare a property surplus, we think you should not declare a property surplus, or we don't have a recommendation, you guys do what you want with the property, whatever's in the best interests of the district. And in fact, I think all three of those recommendations are likely as we move forward, and I'll try to share with you what I know about the direction of the committee as far as I can. I said I would talk about this item right here, the information provided to the committee by the district in a minute, and I will. I think it's important for the council and the community to understand that the district, at this point, the ball is not in the district's court. It hasn't even reached the district. And when I say that, I'll share with you by way of an example. At one of the 7-Eleven committee meetings that we had at Anacapa, we were being besieged at the district with letters from the public, and it was almost as if there was a public rallying cry to beat up the district for even considering selling the property, when in fact the district wasn't considering selling the property. The district, it hadn't even been in front of the district yet, and there was no plans to bring it in front of the district until several months, because the committee hadn't finished its review, the committee hadn't brought a recommendation to the board, and the board hadn't even decided whether they even wanted to talk about it. And so I had to speak up at one of the public hearings at Anacapa and share with the whole audience, which the room was packed, that the difference, I had to explain the difference between the committee's role, which is primary and initial in terms of the time frame of the review of the properties, and that the district was not, in fact, considering anything because it wasn't even on our plate yet. And by way of illustration, what I can tell you was there were cat calls from the audience when I was explaining it, to the degree of, well, we know you talked to the YMCA 10 years ago. You're not being transparent. And I thought to myself, well, that's kind of mean, because none of us have even been here for 10 years. Like, it's a brand new board, it's a brand new administrative staff. I don't know what was being discussed at the time. And I can't vouch for that in any case. We just want to hear the citizens' best thinking on the Anacapa property, and then we'll take that to the board, and the board can, the board will then have the autonomy to make decisions on the recommendations of the committee. And the same is true here. In this case, some of the letters that we've been receiving from the community are things like, why is the district proposing to sell the property? Why is the district considering tearing down a historical monument? Why is the district planning to put Section 8 housing on the property? All of which are completely premature and based on, I don't really know what they're based on. And that's why I'm so looking forward to this presentation, so we can try to correct the record and help everybody understand exactly where we are. So where we are right now is the committee has engaged in a number of meetings. They've all been held according to the Brown Act. They've been publicly noticed. They've been publicly agendized. Many of them have been well attended. We have public comments at all of the meetings, and some meetings have had a few speakers and some have had many, many speakers. But like publicly agendized school board meetings, the 7-Eleven committee meetings have been publicly noticed, publicly held, and publicly commented on. So moving down, I'm going to move into away from the background and just kind of share with you a little bit of background on the charge before the committee, not the board, the committee. So the committee was asked to look at the properties that you see here, and primarily they are either properties that the district owned that was currently vacant or leased or not being used for an educational purpose, or properties that could potentially have alternative uses. Again, all in support of being good fiscal stewards of our resources before we went to the taxpayers and asked them to chip in for the renovations that would supplement any money we could raise from the general obligation bond. Which, by the way, I think it's appropriate at this time to share with you that at a recent board meeting, I think it was either this last one or the one before, time has been going by so fast that I honestly have been having a hard time keeping up. The board decided to not seek the placing of a general obligation bond on the November election and ballot. And I believe that the reason behind that was because the board knew that this was a very difficult fiscal environment to go to voters and ask them to contribute higher taxes in the form of a general obligation bond, even though the initial polling on that was strong and that the public seemed to recognize a great need to take care of our schools for the betterment of the educational experiences of our kids. I applaud the board for making that decision. I think it was the right decision, as much as it pains me as the superintendent to tell our principals and our school communities that we won't be able to have a very large infusion of much needed renovation dollars. I believe our site principals and site staffs understand that this is just not a good time to go to the voters and ask for that support. So that would mean that we would delay that process for about 2 years until the next election, likely. And we'll see what the environment holds for us at that time. So you can see the list of properties that the Avenue School is out on the Avenue. As you know, it's on the left side of the street as you're heading east. It's currently vacant. The Sudden and Jewett Estates, I'll show you maps of those properties here in a second. Those are farm plots on the east end of town. You know where the Washington School is. That sits in the heart of your community. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here. We also, where it says with potential or alternative uses, that stems from the fact that many of our schools have very large lots that are not as well, or not as either not as frequently used by the students, or could potentially be subdivided to support development of one kind or another if the community saw fit and if the board saw fit. So I will tell you that the reaction from the communities of Loma Vista, Will Rogers, Atlas, and Anacapa were not positive. They were very defensive of their field space and green spaces. And my answer to all those communities when they were expressing upset was, that's okay. There's no proposal by the district. You telling us how you feel is of value. That helps us make better decisions as a board and as a school district. And so the fact that you think it's a bad idea is okay. Like, we're not upset by that. We are seeking your input, and if the input is no, then there's a value to that as well. So I will share with you in a minute where I think we are on those properties, but it's important to note that the Washington School, the Sudden Estate, and the Jewett Estate had already been declared surplus, which had allowed the properties to be leased, and in fact they are currently leased, the two estate properties by farmers and the Washington School by the Ventura Christian School. So the question I've been asked in the past, well then if they're already declared surplus, why are they on the list? It's because the board could potentially decide to end the leases and sell the property, for example, or subdivide it and put teacher housing on it, or there's all kinds of different uses that they might think of, and we wouldn't feel good about doing that without having the Citizens Oversight Committee at least weigh in on those issues, even though at this point the board could do that because they were already declared surplus many years ago. So I think that again shows transparency and interest in the community's opinion on these properties, even beyond what they had to do, because they already had the right to skip this and go ahead and go straight to a board process. They didn't do that. They asked us to put them before the Citizens Committee to get the benefit of the Citizen Oversight Committee's best thinking. So if I'm going to scroll down here. These are, let's see, this is a map of our properties. And by the way, these documents, our public documents. They're all posted on our website. And if you have trouble finding these, or if you want a set for the council, Dan, you can just email me afterwards and I'll send you a link directly. You can probably see it right here in the URL. You could take a screenshot and find those. I'm going to skip that.
Have Greg do that. Greg, do that, please.
Got it.
Okay, perfect. So this is a map of the Avenue School. As you can see, this is the avenue here. This is the 33 going up to Ojai, and I'm just going to skip through these fairly quickly. This is the Sudden Estate. This is the farm plot that's kind of landlocked in between Foothill and Telegraph, just to the west of Saticoy Avenue. This is the Jewett Estate, which is also a farm plot that's just off of Ralston, adjacent to some housing developments. You can see the obvious attraction to a developer if somebody wanted to put houses here, because there's a street right there, and which they could extend if they wanted, and there's already developments there. So that's why that one's on the list. And then this is the Washington School. You can see, I think you guys usually have your meetings over here in these buildings, and here's the historical building, and this is the Hearst Avenue on the back side, Main Street right here. This is Atlas School. There's a section of this, the red part indicates a section of the property along Darling Avenue that we asked the committee to take a look at. Come on now. This is Anacapa Middle School, if I can get it to go back. There we go. This is Anacapa Middle School. This one was put on in front of the, I'm sorry, that's Will Rogers. I gotta go back. It's reacting very slowly right now. Okay, there's Atlas. All right, there we go. There's Loma Vista, which is along Loma Vista Road. The lower lot here the committee was asked to review this piece of property, which, by the way, we got in a bus and drove the committee around so they could look physically and see the properties in person. This is Will Rogers. The committee was asked to look at this part of the lot along Thompson, adjacent to a parking lot. And then this is Anacapa. I alluded to this property before. I don't know exactly when, and maybe Sabrena can help me, because I'm still a relative rookie here in Ventura, having only been with the district for about 15, 16 months. I don't know exactly when this proposal was first made by the YMCA, but they like their facility. They provide an extremely valuable service to our community in the form of recreation to a broad base of a constituency of our community. And they had for many years been interested in designing some shared use spaces in the circled areas. That goes back way before my time. And so I was asked to put this property on the community. At one meeting, both the YMCA and the school community had a public hearing where they, many speakers. This is the Educational Services Center. This is our district office on Stanley Road. Obviously, it's a huge piece of property. The district mostly inhabits this part of the building right here, and a very small, tiny piece of this building over here where the community college district used to be. And there's a La Petite preschool over here. But it's an awful big piece of property and an awful big building to be inhabited only, 50, 60%. So we were asked to have the committee look at this property here. So that being said, the bottom line, and then I'm happy to turn it over to Sabrena to smooth out the bumps or correct me on some things if I missed some things or got anything wrong. I believe, having attended all the meetings, that the recommendation from the 7-Eleven committee to the board is likely to be that the Sutton estate, the Jewett estate, and the Washington School go to the Board of Education of the Ventura Unified School District with no recommendation. They are not recommending, I don't think they're going to recommend it to be declared surplus or not. They're just going to say, we don't have a recommendation on those properties. Just do what you think is in the best interest of the district. I think that the Avenue School and the district office building will be recommended to the school board to declare those properties surplus. And I believe that the Will Rogers, Loma Vista, Atlas, and Anacapa schools will all be recommended to the board that they not be declared surplus. The last thing I want to add is one of the things that has been extremely challenging in this process has been to for district staff, myself, and Dr. Dannenberg on the school board attends the meetings, and Betsy George, who was our chief business official until just recently when she got stolen away by a neighboring district, to attend the meetings and to serve as a resource to the committee and to not weigh in at all. Like we have only been responding to the committee with requests for information, with room reservations, with agenda postings and development. We take care of the minutes for them. But I was asked in prior meetings and by prior groups why the district didn't do this or why the district didn't do that. And what I would say is I would repeat again, this is not the district's effort at this point. This is the Citizens Oversight Committee, and we're only serving as a resource. And I think you can see that how important it is to honor the work of the Citizens Committee without weighing in and trying to steer the conversation in any given direction. Some of the letters that we've been receiving about the Washington School had to do with why we didn't try to shut it down, or why we're trying to sell it, or why we're trying to build this or that. Neither end of that continuum is accurate or correct. The district has not had any discussions on it. The board has not had any discussions on it, and we don't have a position. We're waiting to get the recommendations of the committee. And the one discussion that was had by the committee, I wanted to pull that up and show you. These are the official minutes. I think this is important to read because this is the discussion that was had at one of our meetings. And I don't want to read for you because I think that would be insulting to you, but I will kind of highlight that it says that Dr. Flores requested clarification regarding the three properties, Washington, Jewett, and Sutton, and that even though they were declared surplus, the district was asking for whatever input the committee might have on the uses of those properties. Ms. George confirmed that the property was declared surplus in the 90s, the farm plots back in the 70s, and we just would appreciate any input that the community group might have. Dr. Perry, who's on the call, joined the meeting, introduced himself, and spoke about their history as tenants and as the improvements that they put into the facility over time, which everyone agrees have been incredible. Talked about the value of keeping the green space, including the fields, reminded the committee about the Washington School being a historic building, and he would love to continue taking care of the building and remain there as a tenant. In the next couple paragraphs down, you can see that there was one of our members talked about maintaining the historical integrity, that the Ventura County Christian School has been a great tenant. I'm looking through here. There was some discussion about whether there would be room for sports if the back lot was subdivided and developed. There was, at that time, I made a statement asking them to prepare just a general recommendation for the board's consideration, because at that time, I think they were waffling so much and not really sure what they wanted to do. It was a very hard discussion, and they were struggling with it. And I just wanted to encourage them to provide some kind of recommendation, knowing that the board would appreciate the committee's wisdom, and that I'm pretty sure the board will honor all recommendations that are made, because that's what they do. They treat the recommendations with integrity and respect and due consideration. And then the chair of the group said it best when he said the committee needed to give the school district the open-ended option to do what's best while being fiscally responsible. And the committee resolved that they would leave the decision regarding future use of the Washington School, Sutton, and Jewett properties, leave it up to the school board. That's why I said I'm pretty sure that when the 7-11 committee does their final report to the school board, which probably will be in July or August, depending on how soon we can get a public hearing scheduled to finalize the report, then at that time, the board would listen to the committee's report and then decide what they wanted to do about it, if anything. So I'm all tuckered out. I need a drink of coffee, and I will shut up now and turn it over to our board president, Sabrena, if she'd like to add some thoughts.
And if I could just interject a couple of things, just to remind people that you don't need to keep your camera on if you don't want to. The 7-11 committee, I've had people ask me, you know, are they planning to build some 7-Elevens? And the 7-Eleven was just at the beginning, they weren't sure if there were going to be 7 people or 11 people on the committee. And so that's why it's called the 7-Eleven Advisory Committee. And I also neglected to thank our administrator, Greg Mansfield, who's making sure that all this is working tonight. Thank you very much, Greg. Go ahead, Sabrena.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, I'll just add a few things. As Dr. Rice said, I'm one of the board members. I actually live in Midtown and represent this area. But also just did want to call attention to one of my colleagues, Matt Alvarez, is also on the call listening. Again, this is just an opportunity for us to hear from the community. But some of the things I think are really important in this process is to think about is the school district is one of the largest landowners, if in fact the largest landowner in the city of Ventura. We're in a very fortunate position in that we have many properties to serve our community. But with that, we also are in a position of declining enrollment. And that's not just true for Ventura Unified, it's true throughout the state. People are having fewer children, and in general, schools are seeing fewer students. So that puts us in a position of having, in some places, schools that maybe we don't need to fully use. And a good example of that is if you just go down the street a little to Lincoln School, where my kids attended, our enrollment there is really low compared to our East End schools, which are very, very full. Our downtown and midtown schools, Pierpont, Lincoln, tend to be pretty under-attended relative to their neighbors. So these are all things that, as a district, we have to think about to be good stewards of the public's properties. And that's something that we take really seriously. We aren't in a position where we can raise money easily, and one of the things that school districts have as an option is sale of property to raise money to, again, meet the needs of our current students by upgrading or updating our existing facilities. So those are all things that the district was thinking about before we wanted to go to the voters to say, hey, we might need some help by a general obligation bond, which goes under property taxes. We need to look within and see what do we have that we could be using more wisely, and make those decisions. That's where this process originated, and I think it's still really where it sits. We are trying to be good and responsible stewards of the public's resources, and looking with a critical eye at everything that we hold to make sure that we're doing the best for the entire community and for our children. So with that, I mean, I'm certainly happy to take questions. I have answered quite a few phone calls and emails, and one of the reasons that I reached out to Dan and Greg was to say, you know, maybe it would just be easier if we had all this in one place so that people felt comfortable asking their questions and knowing that it's not going to some anonymous person. You know, we're happy to answer it. We don't have any reason to hide anything. We are always trying to be transparent with the community. And as Dr. Rice said, at this point, there are no decisions being made by the board. We have not received any information that suggests one way or another what will happen with these properties. But if a decision is made by the 7-Eleven committee, that doesn't mean that the next day the board would decide to sell something or redevelop something. It means that we have that option in the future, which on the 3 properties that are currently identified as surplus, we already have the option. And we've had that option for 20 years. So, you know, I don't think that there's any urgency or immediacy to action on any of these things, but I understand people's nervousness because it's your neighborhood and it makes sense to be concerned. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions or either Roger or I.
And so just, we did ask for any written comments or actually written questions, but we did get about 3 comments and several questions, written questions sent in. So I will start with that, but for anybody else that would like to ask a question, you need to use the chat line, that little thing up on the top right. I see there's one up there now. So you need to type out, you know, a question and we'll go through them. So I'll go ahead and I had one comment. She objects to selling Washington School to a multi-unit developer, regardless who the intended residents are going to be. Another one from a teacher at the Ventura County Christian School. We are very invested in Washington School and our hopes are that the VUSD will continue to lease the building to us. Thank you. Another comment was, I support a more efficient use of the site, including housing on the grassy area. And then we had a couple of questions, and so I'll leave that to Sabrena and Dr. Rice to answer as either one of you would like to. So the first question is, what's the current enrollment of the school? Do you know that?
Current enrollment of the school district or
No,
Washington School?
Of Washington School, I'm sorry.
The last I heard it was.
So.
I could probably answer that. I'm sitting here at the school right now. It's about 75 students.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Mary.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question, what is the fiduciary duty for the trustees regarding surplus property and balancing the needs of the students, district, and taxpayers? I
don't know if Roger, you want to handle that, but I mean, our role as a governing board obviously is to use the resources that are entrusted to us by the community and by the public to serve our students. And you know, the majority of the money that we receive comes from the state, and that money is used for our educational purposes. When we have money that is available to us for facilities, it's either specifically through grants or from a fund like a general obligation bond, or through sale of other properties. So we have pockets of money that are different for different purposes, but the vast majority of our money, we have no control over what we get. It's given to us by the state or the federal government. We don't get to raise that amount as much as we would like. And so our job is to be responsible stewards of what we have and do the best we can for the community's children with those resources.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just say that if I could refer back to the board's recent decision to not propose putting a general obligation bond on the November election, that also was a sign that they have a responsibility to the community at large in addition to the students. And that was a really hard decision, because the truth is, as the board and the district considered their fiduciary responsibility, it's almost like a zero-sum game, because if you decide to do a bond, then you are imparting a tax on the taxpayers. But if you decide not to do a bond, then you're deciding to live with facilities that are less than what they could be. It's not like just deciding to not do a bond, everything's okay. It's you're acknowledging we're going to have to live with facilities badly in need of renovation and have kids in those schools for 2 more years before we can fix the things we need to fix. That's a really, really hard thing for us to balance and to live with. And again, I applaud the board's decision, but I think we need to be transparent about the trade-off there.
Thank you. Those are great perspectives. Appreciate that. Another one, does the Washington School have a historic building designation that would keep it from being torn down?
I don't know that it has that, but I would imagine that even if it didn't have it, the preservation committee would have a strong feeling about it. My answer when people have asked me is, I don't believe anyone at the district has any interest in tearing down Washington School. It is a beautiful school. It's an important part of this community's history. I mean, I love looking at it as a community member, and I think that just like with the Avenue School, which is also a beautiful historic building in need of significant repairs, those are part of our legacy as a community, and I think it's important that we preserve them. And I have heard not one comment from anyone at the school district that there's any interest in removing or significantly altering the schools.
Yeah, I agree. I have not heard any one say that building, we should tear it down and put apartments or whatever it is. That, in fact, from my selfish perspective as a superintendent, I would love to find Dr. Perry another home and move right back in there. I love that school. I would love to have our Ventura Unified kids in that school. We just can't do it. It's not inhabitable for a public school right now. We've evaluated that a long time ago, and the Department of State architect requirements are just too onerous to get it up to code for a public school. So the fact that it's being used by other kids who can benefit from that building is great. And the same thing with the Avenue School. We would love to be able to fix it up and have it be used for a purpose, I think, that would maintain. That's a beautiful building, and I just don't know that the cost is worth doing that without the resources to pump into it. So I would agree with Sabrena. I haven't heard anybody saying anything about tearing the building down. And in fact, if you look at the map on the documents, it was the only consideration put before the 7-Eleven committee was the back lot.
Thank you. And I'm just going to interject a personal note. The first female principal in the Ventura Unified School District was Clophine Dooley, a great personal friend of mine. And she left all her money to the Sabrena Ventura Art Association so they could open up. So yeah, I would be out there with a pitchfork if anybody wanted to tear it down myself. But but that leads us to our next question. And can the buildings be adaptively reused in the future that would allow other uses besides a public school due to it not being retrofitted?
I would imagine that would be something that could be looked at. Like I said, none of these things have come before us as a board, so it would be awfully early for me to comment. But I think if we were to look at, I mean, I'll give the example of the Avenue School. One of the recommendations that I know the committee is interested in is looking at an alternative use for that building that makes sense for the community. If that is something that the committee recommends to the board, I think it's something that the board would consider, but it's not something we've discussed.
Yeah, I would agree. We haven't talked about that. Although I've heard lots of different ideas. We get approached frequently about the Avenue School from folks that would love to inhabit that building and buy it from us. It's not an undesirable building. Everything from, I don't know, movie producers to retail to real estate agent. We get approached all the time about that building.
I bet you do. And the last question that I have, and then we'll go to the chat questions. or what can the school board do to address racism and desegregation through this process?
Well, I don't know necessarily about through this process, but I'll say I'm particularly proud of the work that the school district has done in the last few years to address equity issues. One of the things that we did in the last year was add as a graduation requirement an ethnic and social justice studies course for all of our high school students. And we've been working very closely with the team of educators from UCLA to really bring an equity lens to the work that we're doing to serve all of our students. So it's something that we aren't just doing with high school kids. I mean, we're looking at how do we change the way that we all interact as a community and treating one another with respect, from our TK program all the way up through our 18-year-old adults who are going out into the world. It's something that's really important, and I think we would have made even more progress had we not had to shut our schools in March, because it was something that we had on the radar to work on this spring. But it's something that the district has had on its short list of priorities for the last several years, and I think we're making real progress.
Yeah, I agree, and I would just add one small thing, but I think it's an important thing to notice, and that is, I think the first step to that kind of cultural change in any agency or school district is listening, right? And so one of the things that the district did before I got there was to start impaneling parent advisory committees. And we had a superintendent's parent advisory committee that was made up of diverse representatives from all over the district, but also just in the past year or so, we impaneled 2 additional parent advisory committees so we could hear directly from parents of students with special needs or students who receive special education services, as well as an African-American parent advisory council, so we could hear directly from the African-American community. So I agree with Sabrena, the district, and I can say this coming from the county office, and for 10 years I was at the county office, and I got a good view of what everybody's doing around the county. And I was blown away by how far Ventura Unified was into this effort, as opposed to what I had seen in other surrounding districts.
Thank you very much for that. And I did actually catch a few minutes of your meeting on Tuesday night, the board meeting. And I know you have a 2-day conference coming up, or all-day things, trying to figure out how you're going to get back to school, if that's going to be possible. The one part that I heard was, though, like the 76 seated buses can only accommodate with social distancing like 12 to 14. So that just in one little nutshell kind of tells you the whole idea. And so Greg, I also have a question for you. The chat questions, am I the one that sees those?
Yep, you have them. You can start asking.
Okay.
But I think they're available to everyone else too.
Sabrena, can you see the chat questions?
I can, yeah. So the first one is from Jill, and it says, why can't we approach the governor about increasing lottery money for the schools? Texas is an example where lottery money goes to 25% of 25% of lottery money goes to their schools. You know, in California, if you ask educators about lottery money, they'll frequently kind of chuckle, because what has happened in the way our legislature uses lottery money is that the money that comes in from the lottery that goes to schools typically is offset by money that then they don't give us that we're entitled to through the general fund. So it ends up not being a huge windfall for education, and much of those funds are strictly restricted to what they can be used for. So obviously every dollar counts, and nobody would be turning their nose up at money that comes from the state, but the lottery hasn't been you know, a windfall of money for schools.
I agree. I don't have anything to add, except that it typically is 1% of our budget.
Yeah, if you just want to go ahead with the questions, follow them down there. There's a couple of questions that I don't know that you could see. So I'm going to read this first one. Why can't we approach the governor? Or I guess that you did. Did you see the one about lotto monies then?
Yeah,
I guess you did
yeah.
just. So you are able to see that. I wasn't sure if you could. Okay, I'll shut up and let you go ahead.
So the next one says, if the district office uses such a small area, why not close those offices and move them to the Avenue School? I think those two things are probably unrelated. We are seriously considering moving our headquarters to a more appropriately spaced location and to something that might be more centrally located for the community. And that's a 26-acre site that has a lot of potential for other uses, whether that's in bringing in a large business that would provide jobs for the city of Ventura, or whether that land got redeveloped for some other purpose. We aren't the right people probably to be in that building anymore, and we've struggled to find tenants, so it just hasn't been a good place for us for some time.
Yeah, and I would just add, specific to the Avenue School, that I think the amount of square footage that we need, if I remember the analysis right, was in the neighborhood of 50,000 square feet for the district office, and the Avenue School would be a very small portion of that. So it's not large enough for that purpose, but certainly it could be used for other purposes, and certainly at the board's discretion, we could potentially sell that large property that could be put to better use. That's always a possibility, and then look for other housing for the district office in general. So the idea that you're floating is not a bad one. I will tell you that out of respect for the effort that went into buying and acquiring that property, that there is some sensitivity to that issue. A lot of people worked hard to get that building. It's just been a real challenge to have it be efficiently used. We've been trying to lease the other half of the building for the better part of 5 years or 6 years, from what I understand, and just have had no luck at all. So I feel like the board will likely engage in discussions on that issue as the fall and winter approach. That would be my guess.
So the next question is, if the Christian school leases Washington School for $1 a year, could it be leased for a bit more reasonable amount? I'll throw that one to you, Dr. Rice.
Yes. I think what I would say is to honor the contributions of the Ventura County Christian School. I believe it's easy to say, why in the world would you lease it for $1 a year? But I think that agreement was put into place many years ago at a time when the building was essentially uninhabitable, and the trade-off was that the school was going to put in quite a bit of their own money to rehabilitate it, and they've done a magnificent job. The latest information I have was that was extended through, I think, October of 21, just to buy some more time for the board to deal with the issue. But my guess is that as the current lease winds down, that we would be likely looking at something closer to market rate, if only because the board does have a fiduciary responsibility to take care of its own students, and that means making the most of the opportunities you have. So I don't know that the $1 a year would be an ongoing thing forever.
And then we have a comment from Dr. Perry, who says, thank you for walking us through the purpose and process of the 7-Eleven committee. This helps clarify things. And of course, we have great interest in continuing our lease based on ongoing improvements to the property and retaining the current field size, but thank you for the clarification. And that was really, I will say, an important part of why we agreed to do the town hall, is we really felt like there was a lot of misinformation and sort of lack of transparency in this process for people who live in the neighborhood and may not be connected to the schools. And we have no interest in that. We want you to know what's going on, and if you have questions, we want you to feel like you can ask them. It's important. Up next, from Danielle Brown, a traffic assessment should be done for the Washington School neighborhood The area is already heavily impacted by 2 schools, 2 churches, a dancing studio. These streets were built during the time of the Model T Fords, and it's impossible to drive these streets as it is. Selling or leasing to anyone would increase traffic. And that would certainly, one of the things that I think people don't necessarily know is that the school district doesn't have any special magic wand when it comes to property developments. If we decided to do anything on any of our schools, not only are we subject to all of the normal building requirements and processes that the city of Ventura would ask us to comply with, but there are additional standards from the state that are very significant. And those are things that we don't get any exemptions from. So if we're going to use a facility to house students, there are very strict safety requirements. But even on any property that we own that we wanted to do something else with, we're bound, as any other resident in the city would be, to go through the process, including public hearings and all of the design review and anything else that the city chose to impose.
All right, it's getting on to be about an hour, and if there's any more questions, I see one more that came up. If you want any questions answered, you can please get them in now. And I see one more has been added there from Jill to all.
Yeah, just saying thank you, and you're totally welcome. And I really do hope people feel comfortable reaching out to us. As I said, I live in Midtown Ventura, and my email is very public on the district website. I'm happy to answer questions. I know Dr. Rice has done that as well, and I regularly attend the Midtown Community Council meetings. So if people have questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. I'd much rather come and chat face to face or over GoToMeeting if we can't do it in person, to get your questions answered and share with you as much information as we can. Then I would continue to receive email and handling it all onesie twosies. That gets a little bit trying, and it's hard to get the message out in an efficient way without doing this. And we thank you for providing us this venue. It's been really helpful to us as well. And please be assured that following the 7-Eleven committee's report to the board, if at any time the board decides to engage in further discussions about the Washington site, then I would represent the board by reaching out to Dan and the group and saying, hey, at last night's board meeting, they mentioned something about having a discussion. So maybe we can talk. And that's probably several months off, but I just want to assure you, the board nor the staff would be making any kind of progress on any recommendations about Washington School without engaging with you.
Well, we really appreciate that. And I see one message from Jill kind of sums up what I was thinking. Thank you, Mr. Rice and Mrs. Rodriguez, for taking the time for this meeting and clarifying concerns and answering questions. And this has been very helpful. And we really thank you very much for participating and everyone that joined on. I just have an announcement. Our next general meeting, virtual meeting, is July 9th at 7 p.m. with our main speaker will be County CEO Mike Powers. And we also will have a presentation of a development at 2400 Channel Drive. Again, thank you all very much, and thank you both. Sabrena, this was a great idea to have this meeting, because there was just so much rumors going out there, and I think this might help settle us all down to be able to take a breath again. So thank you again very much.